This is a 3D scene rendered entirely in an Age of Empires 2 scenario. It is very low resolution and takes an extremely long time to render, but it is actually 3D. You could render it from a different angle by changing a couple of variables in the XS script. I will explain how this works, but first I'll show a sped up video of the full scene rendering. The scene is rendered using raymarching, so before I get into the details of how the scenario works, I'll briefly explain what raymarching is for anyone who doesn't know. When raymarching, we project a ray out from an origin and move along it in steps until we hit some geometry. But how big should these steps be, and how do we know when we hit something? In this case, both of these questions are answered by representing our scene as a signed distance function. A signed distance function, or SDF, is a function that associates any point in space with the distance to the nearest geometry. In the simple case of a sphere, or a circle in this 2D example, the distance is just the distance between the point and the center of the circle minus its radius. By limiting our raymarching steps to this distance, we can ensure that we don't overshoot and miss some geometry. We just keep taking steps equal to this distance until either the distance gets very small, at which point it's considered a hit, or the ray misses and keeps marching along to some maximum distance. With that covered, we can now implement raymarching in an XS script. XS scripts are programs that can be used by random maps, scenarios, and AIs. We won't worry about lighting calculations for now. Here we just calculate whether a ray for each XY coordinate on the map hits a sphere in our scene. If the ray travels more than a certain distance without hitting anything, we consider it a miss. Now that we have this basic raymarching implemented, how can we represent its results on the map? We could place an object to represent whether it was a hit or a miss. For example, we could place some barrels if the ray hits something, or a black tile if it misses. We can update scenario variables using the XS script to tell the scenario where we want to place the object, and which object to place. Unfortunately, the placeObject trigger doesn't allow you to place objects at variable locations, so we would need a separate trigger for every tile on the map. That's 14,400 triggers for just a 120 by 120 map. There is a much easier way though. We have the map in some object. Here I arbitrarily picked reeds. The replaceObject trigger can be used to replace the reeds in an area. Here we replace them in a line along the y-axis with rainforest trees. A similar thing can be done along the x-axis, replacing all rainforest trees with acacia trees. This leaves us with a single acacia tree that we can replace with our desired object, either a black tile or a barrel. This method only needs a trigger for every possible x and y value, rather than every tile on the map. We could reduce the trigger number further by dividing the map into chunks, and representing each with a z-coordinate, but just x and y values are fine for now. I used ARE2 Scenario Parser, a Python library for editing ARE2 scenario files, to add the triggers here, since that is a lot easier than making them all manually. With that done, we can see our raymarcher in action. I'm only rendering a small section of the map here, but it's enough to see the basic silhouette of the sphere, and confirm that the raymarcher is working as intended. With everything working so far, we can add some lighting. I won't explain everything here since it's beyond the scope of the video, but in brief I implemented some very basic Lambertian lighting using normals calculated numerically, by sampling the SDF at a few points. The shadows are just done by raymarching from the intersection point towards a light source to check if anything is blocking it. In addition to the new lighting, we add another sphere to the scene and put them in a small room. The scene is also rotated so that a positive y direction corresponds to up on the map, and the scale of the x-axis is altered since otherwise the scene looks stretched, as tiles in Area 2 are wider than they are tall. To represent the results on the map, we need a color palette to represent the different light levels present in the scene. This could be done using just the default graphics, perhaps using different trees to color the map different shades of green. However, I took the easy way out and just made a mod that colored various in-game objects to just be grey tiles of varying lightness. That's pretty much all there is to the final scene that was shown at the start of the video. If you'd like to download the scenario, I'll leave a link to both it and the grey tile graphics in the video description. Be aware that clicking on some of the trigger effects in the scenario editor can break it. I'm not sure why this happens. I think that it's just for the replace object triggers added using Scenario Parser. There are certainly a lot of things that could be improved about this scenario. It renders extremely slowly, taking around 4 in-game hours to render the full map. That becomes much faster when we set the speed to 8 times using debug mode, but it's still a long time. We could actually render a much more detailed scene with much more complex lighting calculations without much impact on performance, as the main bottleneck is not the raymarching calculations in the XS script, but rather the fact that the scenario only loops through the triggers once every in-game second. A lot of performance could be gained by copying the triggers to perform more than one tile calculation per loop. The color palette mod is also not great. I only bothered making 25 different shades here. Much nicer scenes could be made with more to choose from, especially if some color is added rather than just having grey tiles. I'm not really sure why I decided to make this scenario. It's not like anyone will ever need to render a 3D scene in ARE2, but I did have fun making it, so I suppose it wasn't a complete waste of time.